Hello and welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm Jassim Azzawi. America's private army in Iraq, the security contractors, are making a killing. To some, they are money-hungry mercenaries. To others, they are patriots filling a troop gap. But regardless of what we call them, they are roaming in Iraq with total immunity from prosecution and zero liability and oversight. Employed in the most privatized war in modern history, these guns for hire are politically expedient. Their deaths do not get noticed in the official books. So are they the revolution military affairs Rumsfeld talked about? Or are they tools in the hands of Halliburton and KPR to make billions in profits? Nadeem Baba reports.
Late 2005 and a home video from Iraq causes a scandal. The tape was shot by private security contractors, apparently showing how they used civilians as target practice. It was linked unofficially to a British company that's part of a multi-billion-dollar industry in Iraq that employs up to 50,000 people. Thanks to a law first introduced by the Coalition Provisional Authority, they can't be prosecuted.
What happens if you have a Romanian company that's funded by seized assets that's hiring Fijian security officers? Now, if you have security contractors who shoot an Iraqi individual, under which law is that person liable for? Iraqi law, Fijian law, Romanian law, or US law? It's a total mess.
One of the largest firms involved is Blackwater. The US company came under the spotlight when 4 employees were murdered in Fallujah. Some believe they paid the price for previous killings of civilians by US soldiers. Often, though, it's the other way round, with American officials complaining that unregulated operators create huge problems for those in uniform. And it's not only when they mistreat Iraqis.
And we also have seen plenty of incidents where contractors have actually fired on U.S. military personnel, or what they call white-on-white activities. And so, to me, the sort of lack of integration with the U.S. military is the largest cost of using them.
Compounding that is that people sometimes masquerade as private security people when they're insurgents. So you have mass chaos on the battlefield. It's really unsettling and disturbing, the whole situation. People say war is hell, but this only makes it worse.
Private security contractors have been extremely well paid, up to $2,000 a day. But as the industry's grown, wages have fallen, and all the while the work gets more dangerous. Now the vast majority of those doing it are local staff, caught up in the chaos of today's Iraq. Nadeem Baba for Inside Iraq.
To understand why the US and Britain need to employ guns for hire, I am joined from Washington by Brad Blakeman, a political commentator and a former senior White House aide, and by Phyllis Bennis, author of Challenging Empire and fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington. Welcome to Inside Iraq. Brad, let me start with you. Why does the only superpower in the world need guns for hire, needs those security contractors?
Because there are certain things that the military forces can do and certain things they can't. And quite frankly, Memorandum 17 created the atmosphere by which contractors could come in and provide not only security forces, but also forces that are needed to rebuild Iraq and to provide essential services. Our army and our military structure has been in transformation in the last 10 years in giving more responsibility to civilians for logistics, not necessarily security. So it's a needed service. The question is, quite frankly, are the Iraqis comfortable with the current setup? Now that there is a government established in Iraq after the coalition, it's really up to them to pass laws that are necessary, whether or not these security contractors are welcome in their country. It's not up to the United States anymore.
Before we get to the Iraqis later on, perhaps, Phyllis, but did you buy the argument that the U.S. actually needs them? Why did they need them in the Second World War? Why did they need them in Vietnam? Why did they need them in Korea? Why do they need them now?
Because Donald Rumsfeld and his cohorts in the Pentagon are trying to wage this illegal war on the cheap. And the view was that you didn't need a lot of soldiers. You weren't going to have to occupy the country with U.S. soldiers because we could hire people, privatize the military, privatize the war. The war was illegal from the moment of the invasion, bringing in It's now up to something like 125,000 mercenaries, about half of whom are armed, or a little less than half. The other half are doing things like cooking food, washing dishes, driving trucks, all the things that low-ranking military people once did. And this is the explanation of why we can go to war with a much smaller army relying on high-tech bombing. And the key question here is, to whom are these people accountable? And the reality is, at the moment, they are accountable to no one.
And yet the reality, Brad, is it's a recognition of the reality. Their presence is there. Simply as Phyllis said, you know, the United States refused to take the perhaps recommendation of Secretary Eric Shinseki when he said we need 400,000 in order to go to Iraq for the post-war period. And yet they were forced to get these security contractors in order to create that reality.
The reality is that Phyllis is wrong. These folks are there at the invitation and at the legal authority of the Iraqi government. If the Iraqi government didn't want these people there, they could meet and pass a law and they would be out of existence in a day. The reality is they're needed, they're wanted, and they're doing overall a very, very good job. Over 600 have been killed. The Army doesn't provide protection, nor should they, for civil types of work that the security forces are doing and protecting contractors who are rebuilding Iraq. The American people have given literally tens of billions of dollars to rebuild Iraqi infrastructure. These are where primarily our security forces are working. We've given that money to Iraq, and we've also given
to Iraq. We have given, excuse me, Brad, we have given that money not to Iraq. We have given that money to U.S. and British and other international corporations like Blackwater, like Halliburton, like Bechtel, like a host of others who we claim are going to do a better job rebuilding Iraq than Iraqis themselves might do. And this was not a choice of the Iraqi government, which did not even exist when these contracts were written.
There may be multinational, there may be multinational corporations who are doing this work, and eventually, as the Iraqis get more on their feet, they'll be doing the work. But the bottom line is, the dams that are being built, the electric that is being built, the water, the sewage, everything that is needed,
the water, the sewage
is being provided by a multinational force for the benefit of all Iraqis.
Well, let's just give you all the time you want. If you are serious about looking at how people in Iraq are living, the most important complaint after the lack of security in the streets is the lack of electricity and lack of water. And that's because people remember that after two devastating wars, the Iran-Iraq war that lasted for 10 years and the U.S. war against Iraq of 1990-91, that the Iraqis themselves, despite sanctions, were able to rebuild those infrastructures. Not that well, but enough that people had 24 hours a day of electricity almost everywhere in the country and had clean water. Suddenly, they haven't had that since the U.S. invaded. And the fact that we are putting in people that you say are going to do a better job is simply a lie. This is a privatized war. It remains illegal, and the people of Iraq are suffering more than anyone else.
Brad, I was struck by what you said, that the security contractors are in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government. Certainly Saddam Hussein did not invite them. The Iraqi government, despite the political facade, is not a sovereign country. It's under occupation. So why would you say that?
Saddam Hussein is no longer in power. Matter of fact, he doesn't reside on this earth anymore. He's been toppled because he was a dictator. And when Phyllis said this is an illegal war, she's 100% wrong. This war is 100% legal. It's sanctioned not only by the United Nations, it's sanctioned by the American people and our coalition partners. We are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government, a sovereign government. We're not occupiers. If they didn't want us there, we'd be out tomorrow. We are doing great work for the people of Iraq and the region.
Let me pose that to Phyllis.
If the insurgents would just give us...
They are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government.
They are not there at the invitation of the Iraqi government. This Iraqi government came into power in an election organized and run under conditions of military occupation. But what's clear is these contractors were not invited in by this government. They were already there. They had been invited in not by the government that exists now, which clearly was something the Iraqi people wanted to elect. It's not the issue. The Iraqis themselves are very brave, wanted to take the risk of electing a government, but they were already in place because they had been brought in by the Coalition Provisional Authority, the U.S. Occupation Authority.
Having said that, Phyllis, the successive Iraqi governments Simply, they just kept them. Why don't they just kick them out? I mean, if they cannot kick the American army, why can't they just say, we don't want security contractors?
They don't have the power to do that any more than they have the power to get rid of the Americans. Despite the rhetoric that if the Americans are requested to leave, we will leave tomorrow, that simply is not the case. The Iraqi parliament has voted more than 70% that they want an immediate timetable. And yet, the U.S. government refuses to set a timetable, Congress refuses to set a timetable, the President refuses to set a timetable, and the notion that this war is somehow supported by the American people, given that the most recent statistics have opposition to the war up above 75%, is really laughable. This is a war that was waged in defiance of the United Nations, in defiance of the notion of international law. The so-called coalition, which we call the coalition of the coerced, has collapsed. There are very few countries left, and almost none of them have serious numbers of troops left in Iraq. This is a war that has been a disaster, first for the people of Iraq, secondly for the people of this country and our military, and of course for the contractors themselves, who are paying a price for the terrible notion of what this war has brought to Iraq.
Thank you, Phyllis. We'll take a short break now, but when we come back, I'm going to ask Brad Blakeman whether the security contractors are a legitimate target. Stay with us.
These guys run loose in this country and do stupid stuff. They shoot people and someone has to deal with the aftermath. Brigadier General Carl Horst, Deputy Commander, US 3rd Infantry Division.